And now, 6 minutes later than advertised, we join ITN for the national news at 9 minutes to 10.
A rocket attack in Japan on world leaders fails. Terrorism tops their agenda. First TV pictures of Chernobyl, and milk is checked here. Another major blow to America's space program. And dressed to thrill, the princess turns their heads in Canada. Good evening. The Tokyo summit has opened with a rocket attack by protesters who breached Japan's tightest internal security since the Second World War. Tonight, the 7 world leaders condemned terrorism and appealed for greater nuclear safety. Mrs. Thatcher put forward her own anti-terrorist plan. She wants easier extradition, better cooperation between police forces, and no arms sales to countries backing terrorists. She was speaking only hours after anti-summit left-wingers fired 5 rockets from a window 2 miles from the state guest house where the summit leaders were starting to arrive. The rockets fell wide. One smashed a hole in the road near the Canadian embassy, another landed on a block of flats.
The incident happened just after the official welcome for President Mitterrand. Indeed, the cameras set up for that actually caught what appeared to be the smoke of the rocket's landing. An official Japanese statement tonight said it was clear that the target was the Akasaka guest house where the summit is taking place, and that the point that they were fired from was an apartment about 2 miles away from the guest house. 5 launcher tubes have been set in concrete and have been left pointing out of a locked and empty room with a timing device attached. The police mounted a frantic search in the area, more it would seem to cover their embarrassment than anything else. The Japanese cabinet secretary said tonight he was filled with anger at the incident, which comes despite massive security here, which even involves the use of an airship. At the actual point where the rockets landed, near the Canadian embassy, a hole about 1 foot in diameter and 6 inches deep, made by one of the rockets, which the Japanese police prefer to describe as metallic flying objects. Another of them landed in a nearby courtyard. The radical group responsible for the attack, who call themselves the Middle Core Faction, held a demonstration in Tokyo this morning at which they repeated their threat to crush the Tokyo summit. The leaders' reactions have for the most part been dismissive. Asked about the attack, President Reagan made a joke.
Oh, they missed.
Mrs. Thatcher, who was in her hotel room at the time of the incident, was said to have heard what she thought was a bang or a gun going off. Her reaction when asked about it was sharp.
They're not worried about it. Just don't exaggerate them. All right? Got the message?
That's you, Mr. Prime Minister.
At their dinner tonight, the leaders have, as it happens, spent a good deal of time talking about terrorism, though the specific incident today wasn't discussed. They've also been discussing the nuclear accident in the Soviet Union. Today, a special Japanese cabinet committee has reported a slight increase in radioactivity levels here. The real concern is over how fast and how far the nuclear cloud has travelled. Michael Brunson, ITN, Tokyo.
And here checks on milk were extended today after very small traces of radiation were found from the Chernobyl fallout. The government says they're harmless. And tonight, Soviet television showed film of the stricken plant for the first time.
Russian television tonight thought the most important news was a report on bread shortages in some areas and the launch of a new type of tractor. It was much later in the bulletin that pictures of the damaged reactor were shown. It would appear that the emission of radioactivity has ceased, and there are no signs that the fire is still burning. But the Russian report did say that staff still have to establish reliable control of the remaining 3 reactors, suggesting to experts here that there are still problems. Pictures of the staff village nearby show the area is still severely contaminated and no one has been allowed to return. Taking cameras to the scene suggests radiation levels are falling.
A helicopter pilot who is allegedly flying in the immediate vicinity of the stricken nuclear power station is actually not wearing any observable breathing apparatus whatsoever. What is really significant is the length of time that this shot is taking, because if the radiation levels were very high, you would expect a cameraman who's taking this shot to be exposed quite severely to radiation. And clearly the radiation levels cannot be high because he's staying there for such a long time.
The Russian report said that specialist squads are now cleaning up the polluted areas near the nuclear plant.
In Britain, minute harmless traces of radioactivity are finding their way into food. Levels in milk are now being monitored throughout the country, especially in the north. Winds and rain have caused higher radiation levels there. Vegetables too are being checked, but the government says radioactivity would have to increase by hundreds of times before people should worry.
We are continually monitoring milk and outdoor vegetables, and so far as the present levels of our returns are concerned, there is no cause for anxiety.
Some of these students who returned from the Ukraine last week were found to have 50 times the normal dose of radiation. But scientists at the National Radiological Protection Board are confident they won't suffer any harm. They say it's because the man in the street knows so little about radiation and its effects that concern is inevitable.
I do not believe there is a case for anybody to be frightened by the present situation. I can't ask them to be not concerned. Of course they're concerned.
Strict monitoring of radioactivity will continue, although the prevailing winds seem to be blowing the fallout north and away from Britain.
Demonstrators and police are blaming each other for last night's violence outside Mr. Rupert Murdoch's Wapping print plant. 175 police officers were injured, 43 taken to hospital, along with 34 demonstrators. There were 81 arrests.
The police came under a hail of missiles as clashes with demonstrators left scores injured on both sides. What had begun as a peaceful protest quickly deteriorated into savage fighting. Though print workers were in the front line, organisers said those hurling missiles were mostly left-wing sympathisers or outside infiltrators. The mounted police responded by scattering the crowds with a succession of cavalry charges. Police in riot gear moved into the densest part of the crowd in an atmosphere already charged with fear and anger. With injuries mounting, there were accusations of police brutality.
The reaction of the police here tonight is quite obscene. They're totally out of control. They're acting like a bunch of drunken thugs.
I really would say that this does demand a public inquiry. It must do.
Today, the police responded by putting on show the weapons they say were collected last night at Wapping.
It was an appalling scene. We took heavy casualties, and I think it was a tragedy for everybody involved.
The police say the array of weapons proved the violence was pre-planned and directed at them. As the clearing up went on today, the print union said their fight wasn't with the police, but with News International, of the 6,000 sacked workers. Mark Webster, ITN, Wapping.
President Reagan is said to be determined to press ahead with the US space program despite the failure of a Delta rocket just after blastoff.